Wanted to talk to you about something.
Two shipyard workers went fishing on the Pascagoula River in 1973. Hours later, they walked into a Mississippi sheriff's office, claiming something had taken them from the riverbank. Police believed their story was impossible, so deputies secretly left a tape recorder running after the interview ended. What it captured became one of the most disturbing pieces of audio evidence in UFO history. The tape, Pascagoula, Mississippi, October 11, 1973. On the evening of October 11, 1973, two shipyard workers went to the riverbank at Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Last October, in the quiet Mississippi town of Pascagoula, two local men confronted authorities with a rather bizarre story. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker told of a strange craft landing near their fishing site and of being taken aboard by three unearthly creatures.
The Pascagoula River cuts through the Mississippi Gulf Coast like a black industrial artery. Shipyards line the shoreline, cargo cranes rise above the water. At night, the river becomes a maze of shadows, machinery, dock lights, and empty industrial silence. In 1973, Pascagoula was a hard-working shipbuilding town. Most people there worked long hours around steel, welding sparks, heavy equipment, and river traffic. Stories about monsters or spacecraft belonged in movies, not on the Gulf Coast. The file begins with two names, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. Hickson was the older man. Parker was 19. They were not looking for a mystery. Charles Hickson was 42 years old, a shipyard foreman, divorced, a veteran, a man described by coworkers as serious and practical. Calvin Parker was 19, quiet, religious, reserved. Friends later described him as deeply uncomfortable with attention. The two men knew each other through work at the shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi. They were fishing after work on the west bank of the Pascagoula River. The location matters because this story begins at a real dock, on a real stretch of water. Across the river was an industrial shoreline. This was a working river. On the evening of October 11th, 1973, they decided to fish after work. It was not unusual. The riverbank was close, the weather was calm, and the dock they chose sat away from most of the city lights. They drove toward an old pier along the west bank of the Pascagoula River, carrying fishing equipment and beer. The area was industrial, shipyards, storage yards, dark water. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The river was quiet. The dock was empty. Water moved slowly beneath the wood planks. Shipyard lights shimmered faintly in the distance. The men cast their fishing lines into the dark water and settled into the silence. Then both men heard something. Not an explosion, not an engine. Charles Hickson later described it as a strange whirring or hissing sound somewhere above the water. The sound grew louder. Both men turned toward the river and saw light moving across the darkness. Then, both men noticed something over the water. Hickson later described a smooth object hovering low over the river. Not a plane, not a boat. Parker froze. Hickson said he did too. Then, the encounter moved from sighting to contact.
When they appeared there in front of me, it was the most shock I've ever had in my life.
Hickson said three beings came toward them.
When that second looked, it looked pale, like, to me, the best I remember. But you was so damn scared though, and something happened like that.
You said it looked kind of like a wrinkled skin, just
no
clothes.
Well, it could have been. There was no clothes, but they looked kind of pale.
The description was strange, but it was specific. Some summaries vary on the being's height, but the sketch preserved in this file points to figures roughly 6 feet tall. The light moved toward the shoreline. At first, both men assumed it might be some kind of aircraft, but the object did not move like an airplane. It did not sound like a helicopter. It did not behave like anything either witness had seen before. The object approached silently above the river, then stopped, hovering only a short distance from the shoreline. The object did not look like a flying saucer. Both men described something more like a flattened football, blue-gray in color, smooth, silent, with two bright lights visible on one side. Hickson said the beings guided them toward the object.
By then I was so damn scared I didn't know anything. And they glided me in that thing. Just, how you just guide somebody in a thing.
From this point, the account becomes harder to visualize.
It looked like an eye. Like a big eye.
He did not describe a normal room. No cockpit, no seats. The glow reflected across the water beneath it. Neither man understood what they were looking at. Calvin Parker later claimed he became overwhelmed with fear almost immediately. Charles Hickson tried to make sense of the object, but then things became worse. Both witnesses later claimed they suddenly lost control of their bodies. Parker said he felt completely paralyzed, unable to run, unable to speak, unable to move. Hickson later claimed the object seemed to pull them toward it. And then the beings appeared, not creatures in uniforms, not normal people, something else. Pale gray figures, wrinkled skin, long hanging arms, strange mitten-like hands, no visible neck, and faces neither witness could properly describe. The figures moved toward them without emotion, without speaking, without hesitation. Parker later said he believed they were going to die. What stands out in the record is the absence. No control room, no chairs, no visible controls. After the encounter, Hickson and Parker went to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The story moved from private fear into official handling.
See, all they'll tell you is call the sheriff department. So that's when I called the sheriff department.
And most importantly, there was a recording. The beings reached the men near the dock, and according to both witnesses, they were taken aboard the object. Inside, the environment felt cold, mechanical, unnatural. Hickson later described smooth metallic walls and bright clinical light. He claimed strange entities appeared to examine him while he floated or remained suspended. Parker later said the fear became so intense that he blacked out. Neither witness could clearly explain how long the experience lasted. There were no visible controls, no obvious seats, no recognizable technology, only bright light, silence, and the overwhelming feeling that they were trapped inside something they could not understand. Then suddenly, it was over.
What kind of seats they have?
They weren't in the seats. I didn't see any seats at all. When I was in there, I was just like I was floating on the air.
The men found themselves back near the riverbank. The object hovered above the water for a final moment, then rose away from the shoreline and disappeared into the Mississippi night. For several moments, neither man fully processed what had happened. Parker later claimed he broke down emotionally near the river. Hickson attempted to calm him. Both men understood how impossible the story sounded, but instead of hiding it, they drove directly to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The drive to the sheriff's office was quiet. Neither man fully understood what had happened along the river. When they arrived, deputies initially treated the story with skepticism. The witnesses looked exhausted, sweaty, shaken, but their account sounded impossible. Investigators began separating details, asking repeated questions, trying to identify inconsistencies. At first, deputies suspected the men might be intoxicated or attempting a prank. From there, the case moved outward. Newspapers picked it up. Interviews followed. It entered the public record.
Several other scientists and investigators were asked to consult and look into the situation. I was asked if would I mind if I would be present, and I said I wouldn't mind at all. And while it is still very difficult for us to believe that a spaceship landed and that robot-type creatures came out and actually took these two people into the spaceship, these men, in my opinion, believed that they saw this and that they were being honest in reporting what they have reported.
Still, police believed the men would eventually break character, so investigators decided to test them. Without informing Hickson or Parker, deputies left a hidden tape recorder running after the formal interview ended. The witnesses were left alone in the room. Investigators expected the men to relax, to laugh, to admit they had invented the story. Instead, the hidden recording captured something entirely different. Fear. Real fear. The recording captured the men speaking privately while believing nobody was listening. Parker sounded terrified. Hickson sounded emotionally exhausted. At one point, Hickson quietly said, "We thought we was dying." Another section described the beings. There was 3 of them. Parker could reportedly be heard praying quietly. The tone of the recording disturbed investigators because the men did not sound like people performing a prank. They sounded traumatized. The question became whether the men were acting, confused, or genuinely shaken. Then, the record narrowed into something even more specific. The beings, the description, the drawing.
3 men is all I seen. But I was this men, you know, when you call them men, I seen 3 things. The ears was kind of pointed, and the nose like thing was pointed, and looked, they didn't have a mouth like we did. It looked like opening under their nose, the best I could see.
And their arms, they had arms, and I saw the arms moving here and in the shoulders, but they had weld. I mean, their fingers were webbed, and then they had something like a thumb, and they were like this.
I was monkey.
You didn't try to resist
No way I couldn't.
By the next morning, the story had already begun spreading beyond Pascagoula. Local newspapers contacted the sheriff's office. Radio stations discussed the encounter. Television crews started arriving on the Gulf Coast, and almost immediately the case divided public opinion. Some people believed the men were telling the truth. Others believed it had to be a hoax. News of the encounter spread nationally. Researchers arrived in Pascagoula from around the United States. Television interview requests multiplied. Newspapers published sketches of the beings. The encounter became connected to the wider wave of UFO reports occurring during the early 1970s, and the Pascagoula case quickly evolved from a local police report into one of the most famous alleged abduction cases in American history. Skeptics continued offering possible explanations: stress, alcohol, misidentification, fantasy, hoax. But no explanation fully accounted for the hidden tape recording. Because investigators expected the witnesses to eventually contradict themselves once they believed nobody was listening, instead, the tape captured fear. Real fear. And that single decision inside the sheriff's office transformed the Pascagoula encounter from another strange story into evidence people still debate more than 50 years later. This is where the record stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like evidence. The case did not end in 1973. Charles Hickson continued to speak publicly.
I think there has to be a reason why that Calvin and me was picked.
Maybe because you could take it?
Well, it might be. I don't know. I think that they know more of what's going on down here on this earth than we think. And I don't know, they might have been, you might say, looking for somebody that could, you might say, hold up under the strain and convince people that there is another world and there's some kind of life on that world.
For Hickson, the burden of the encounter did not disappear just because the night ended. The story remained in public memory because it was difficult to dismiss completely. More than 50 years later, the Pascagoula case remains unresolved. The sheriff's office recording still exists. The voices are still there, and the fear captured inside that room still feels disturbingly real. No explanation has ever fully accounted for what the 2 men claimed happened along the riverbank that night. The case survived because of the witnesses, because of the consistency of their account, and because of the hidden tape recorder left running after the interview ended. That single decision changed the entire trajectory of the case. Without it, Pascagoula might have become another forgotten local UFO report. Instead, it became one of the most debated encounters in modern UFO history. Researchers still analyze the recording, still study witness testimony, still debate what happened along the river, but even skeptics often return to the same uncomfortable detail: the tape. Because when investigators believed the witnesses were finally alone, when they believed the performance would end, what they captured did not sound rehearsed. It sounded real. This is where the record stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like evidence. Archive Division. Where the file ends, Archive Division begins.
What did you see?
Well, they were shorter than me. I'd say about 5'2" or 3", and they didn't have a neck. The head, it seemed to come directly to their shoulders, and they had something. It came out to a point about where a nose would be, and on each side the ears. And I believe that they looked like they were a little longer on the ears than the nose.
But still pointed the ears.
They were still pointing. Yeah, they had me one on this arm like this, and on the other one, they had my other arm like that. And I just seemed to lift up to the same height they were off the ground, and we just moved into the craft.
Now inside, how did they lay you out? Do you remember how it happened?
Yes. I didn't see any tables or chairs or anything in there. I'm not saying it wasn't in there because the light was almost blinding, but I didn't see any. And when they carried me inside, they seemed to just lean me back, And this eye, well, I keep referring to it as an eye, and it moved up to in front of me about this close. And it started right at my eyes, looking me right in the eye. And it hesitated there for a few seconds, and it just started moving over my entire body. When they brought me from the craft along this area here, and they didn't drop me, they just released me back to the ground. And I fell. I don't know why my legs were weak. I don't know why it was the fright or what it was, but I fell onto the ground. And that's when I seen Calvin. He's standing right over here in this area, and he was standing facing the river with his arms outstretched like that, just like he was staring at something. There has to be a reason why that Calvin and me was picked.
Maybe because you could take it.
Well, it might be. I don't know. I think that they know more of what's going on down here on this earth than we think. And I don't know. They might have been, you might say, looking for somebody that could, you might say, hold up under the strain and convince people that there is another world and there's some kind of life on that world up there.
They were the ones that saw the Pascagoula UFO.